Welcome to the Long View. I'm Julian Zelizer, and I am happy to be here with Karen Greenberg, my friend and co-editor. And we're discussing two new pieces she has out in the last few weeks, Trump's War on Women and Return of the Dark Side. The first appeared in The Nation, and the second on Spy Talk. So, Karen, it's great to have you on the Long View.
Great to be here.
So let's start with your piece on the war on women, and you go through in the article different ways in which this is manifesting itself, and the first is purges of the government workforce. Can you talk about how this has unfolded? A little bit of what you saw.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing how much thank you for starting with the women because, um, yeah, it's amazing how much women at top levels without being noticed, and often the first women in the positions have been let go. And so this has happened across the space, and it's particularly affected Black women, as you might imagine, because of this is a result of uh, uh, Trump's first executive order on his first day in office, which was sort of an anti-DEI. We got to make sure we don't have appointments that are based on diversity, et cetera. And so women have been just summarily let go across the spectrum. One place that it's really prominent that I just want to bring attention to is the military. And that's one of the reasons I called it a war on women, because it seemed appropriate to me that given this war, or symbolically appropriate, that the Pentagon was taking the lead in so much of this. And so currently, there are no active duty four-star women generals, and there are no women in the run up to being 3 or 4-star generals. And I think that's symbolic of the larger attack on women. And often reasons aren't given. At the Pentagon, the reasons are they're not tough enough, they can't do the fighting. They also disbanded the Women, Peace, and Security Initiative at the Pentagon. But in the other realms, it's just they've been just let go. And the reason is that they're women.
And before we go further in it, I mean, do you see this as an intentional policy, or is it an effect of the way in which the administration is doing policy? I know it's hard to know exactly what's going on, but
I think it's very intentional, and I think that I think the shooting last week of, a white middle-class woman who was married to another woman, have the correct optics for understanding what's happening. I think there is a direct attack. Look, they're taking women off of websites, not just in the military, but across government. The history of women is being, removed from places all over the government, not just the historical places, but websites themselves. There's no way that this is just a fallout of some larger policy. This is an attack on women. Oh, let me just point to you what's happening in today's world, which is that one of the things I write about in the article is we have 7 women in cabinet positions plus Susie Wiles, and so that would say, what do you mean they're not promoting women? Look at all these women in these positions. Do you get what kind of attack these women are under? Pam Bondi in recent days has been called too weak. Tremendous loyalty to Trump, still too weak. Tulsi Gabbard left out of discussions about Venezuela, which makes no sense. And it goes on and on. And I also see, as you know from the article, I also see the Lindsay Halligan moment in court where she was unprepared, had no idea what court procedure was, and the attorneys in her office, EDVA, did not come with her to the argument about the James Comey case. In a way, as much as I feel she should have said no, she was set up. And this is not good for women either, to put them in positions where they don't have the capacity to do what they need to do. So to say it's not intentional I just can't think that.
and can you talk more about the changes in the military and the Pentagon? Meaning, not everyone might be aware of where things are in terms of women gaining leadership roles and prominent military roles. Meaning, how damaging is what you are documented to where we are in recent history on changing the Pentagon and changing the military?
Well, let me just say that, you're pointing to something kind of interesting, which is that of the many advances made of women throughout the executive, the one that has taken the longest time and it lags behind the other agencies of government is the Pentagon. And you've had a number of women get sort of senior positions. You have in the past, but it was always slow, and so now it's even more so. But it was an institution that was ripe for catching up, and the exact opposite is being happened. If that addresses your question, and I think it's this idea that women are not weak underlies something else. It's not, I mean, are weak. It's not just that they're weak. It's that and they okay, as a woman I can say this, right? But they have historically and particularly in contemporary times brought a certain sense of um uh, 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 not necessarily wanting the military action to be first. That's why they had the Women, Peace, and Security group to signal the importance of diplomacy, the importance of negotiation, the importance of not just going to war. And the idea that you're weak if that's not what you first want is baked into the pie here. That's part of what's going on. That as women, they bring the wrong perspective, the wrong skills to the table. That doesn't mean all women always want peace and security above the need to conduct warfare or even the urge to conduct warfare. It just means that behind it, there is this assumption that enough women bring this to the table that it renders the Pentagon weaker than it wants to be.
And then the article also talks about public policy and specific areas of policy like healthcare, where again, the effects fall hardest on parts of the population, including women. Can you talk about some of what you document that fits into this larger
Sure.
pattern?
Sure. And this is again why it fits into this war framework, which is that the attack is on bodies. It's not just on the essence of women or the reputations of women, it's on their bodies. And so many of the programs that affect women most severely have been cut, but most concerningly, reproductive rights, maternal care, infant care, all of these programs have been drastically cut, and in fact, some of them just eradicated. And so you have so much that was in place before to take care of women, to address reproductive issues, which we understand in the current context, but to address maternal health. And now that these programs are gone or reduced in tremendous capacity. And so you have a situation where women are struggling. It's not just about jobs that they can get and positions they can hold and influence they can have, but also sort of a feel of an attack on their physical being and their children as well.
And finally, you talk about kind of erasure from the historical record itself, which is something all historians have been watching. But how's that played out in terms of this broader
Well,
war?
this does not just apply to women. The erasure, I mean, you know better than anyway, but the erasure of history in general. It's even hard to know where the guideposts are on how much is being erased. But the first iteration of women being erased, it had come from the websites. So the Army, the Navy, the Arlington Cemetery, erasing information of women that are buried in Arlington Cemetery. And I, of course, point to Jackie Onassis because, I just want you to know the level to which they're willing to take this. NASA, the women are just they're just down from the website. So if you go on and try to find some kind of historical information, it's not there, there to be found.
And how does this compare, by the way, to the first term? I mean, is this much worse? Is it about the same? How do
No.
you compare?
It's much worse. It's much more overt. It's much more active. There was enough in the first term rhetorically. I mean, part of this is also the rhetorical slant on it. Some of the words that have been used against women, not just, quiet piggy, but some of the words that have been used by Trump and some of his, colleagues has been really, offensive, in terms of just their brains, their bodies, everything. And it's just so it's at all levels. It's not just the historical record; it's the language itself that is tolerated right now, and it's very concerning.
And are you surprised or not surprised? I mean, Democrats certainly have not made this a theme so far, unless I've not heard that. But of all the issues people are talking about, this isn't in the mix, and this seems pretty potent politically, given the number of votes. How do you think Democrats have done, and do you think they're missing an opportunity politically to take an important stand.
Well, I think that they're under siege with there's so much to pay attention to, and some of it
Yeah.
is front and center, Venezuela, Iran, you know, I think that Greenland, I think it's a lot to pay attention to now. I do think you're starting to see a turn. You saw Michelle Goldberg's piece today in the New York Times. I think that was important. And I think I think we're getting there but I'm shocked by what's happening and also by the lack of response in terms of leaders. And I do think it's going to affect the election across the board because it's not just the women themselves. They have daughters. And so it's a bigger framework than you might be thinking of.
I mean, are you surprised at all that Republicans are going along with it in such kind of numbers? Meaning, just practically put away moral concerns or ideological. This is a huge part of the vote. Suburban mothers, as an example, or suburban educated women have been such an important part of the electorate. And yet, here's the GOP standing behind their man, so to speak.
Because I don't think they get it yet. I don't that's why the reasons I wanted to write this, and I could have gone on and on in the piece, I got it, to a certain word count, but I think it hasn't been just what you were saying before, it hasn't been brought to the fore yet, it hasn't been acknowledged, it hasn't been stated the way it needs to be stated, and once it's out there, once we can create this narrative and keep it going and put facts and figures out there, and dig a little deeper, even when they're erasing, you would be amazed at how hard it is to get information about a lot of statistics on how many women are there in the military right now. How many? It's really hard. It's just disappeared, and so I do think as we bring attention to it, women will care, and it's it. It's not their fault that it hasn't been brought to the fore. It's our job to bring it out there so it can be discussed.
I want to switch to your other piece, but before I do, I wanted to ask on your thoughts on what's happening in Minneapolis. And I mean, you've written so much on national security and executive power since 9/11. How does what's going on now with ICE kind of connect, or is it different and new from the expansion of executive power vis-a-vis terrorism that you've documented so much? How do you put these together?
First of all, let me say, I do put them together. That's sort of the takeaway in that we changed a lot of things in order to respond initially to the attacks of 9/11. And among them, creation of the Department of Homeland Security. Another was an ever expansive definition of terrorism. Another was being able to twist the law any way we wanted to twist it to be able to justify mistreatment of people, detention of people, etc. I see that coming home right now in Minneapolis, right at this moment in time in Minneapolis, but elsewhere in prior days and months. I see it also, I mean, I see it very strongly in Minneapolis. And it all is a run up to look, in his first presidency and now, Trump wants to use the Insurrection Act. It's very interesting that he hasn't. And in fact, I'm surprised that he hasn't. He had a call after George Floyd, also, Minnesota. He had a call after the George Floyd killing and with governors around the country. And he said to them point blank, look, you either call in the National Guard or I'm going to invoke the Insurrection Act and I'm going to call in the military. You better do this. And the governors weren't having it, right? That was one moment in time. I think he feels that we're now at another moment in time. But so that's not directly connected to 9/11, but it's connected to the past. It isn't coming out of the blue. I think in terms of being able to just say somebody's a terrorist and without any definitional regard for what that actually means and how we understand a terrorist is very interesting. And very dangerous and very scary because there are laws within states, if not federally, for domestic terrorism, and it just opens a whole cadre of who gets called a terrorist and who's subject to this terrorist definition. It's a problem we've had since the War on Terror when it was about foreign terrorists, and we remain with it now. This sort of creating these categories of ever expansive definitions. So those are just a couple of ways that I see a direct link.
And how important, I mean, you wrote the definitive book on Guantanamo. How important was that to kind of opening up now, using facilities in other countries that have horrendous conditions and forms of torture? Do you see those two as part of a bigger story in American politics?
100%. I see how we used, a seacoast, prison, very much within the lungs of, Guantanamo in terms of we didn't know who went there, we didn't know what the conditions were, it wasn't really ripe for this and sort of trying to finagle it afterwards. The just pushing aside of the law in the sense that we'll figure that out later. We've had more process here than we had in the initial Guantanamo and for years. And the idea that there's another really important piece of this, and it's sort of
Mhm.
across the whole thing, which is that Guantanamo created the notion that if you were just in a certain area, a certain place, a certain time, you were guilty. If you belong to a certain group, and I mean group by nationality, you were guilty. And so we rounded up groups and not individuals. And, when these first people got to Guantanamo talking about that book, no one knew who they were. All of their information had been put in one pillowcase that that was not discernible and separable from one another. And so this idea that we can go after categories of humans rather than individual humans is a legacy of Guantanamo, and it's the reason Guantanamo is still such a problem, and that it's still there, and isn't closed. And it was a turn that we took that has not been reparable. Which brings us to the issue of accountability. For so much in the war on terror, we've refused to accept the idea of accountability for anything gone wrong. And now we see there's no worries about accountability. There's no worries about the law kicking in and actually making a difference. There's no worries about people being impeached for what they're doing, or, there may be expressions of it, but I don't think there's much of a worry about the law being reinterpreted, rethought, and and then of course the role of the Office of Legal Counsel within the Department of Justice, which I mentioned, which is that they were used to rethink the law uh, for Guantanamo and for the war on terror generally. And now we see OLC with this memo on the Venezuelan boat strikes, trying to figure out how we actually recreate an interpretation of the law that mixes law enforcement and military in ways that has not been understood to be mixed before. And so, I mean, there's so many layers of how I think this is a consistent evolution.
And in terms of the piece on torture, you're arguing we're seeing more of it again. Was there some kind of break at some point between post 9/11 and now where there was a significant diminishment of this as part of American policy?
Yes. I mean, Obama, first of all, even before the end of the Bush administration, George Bush was like, we're done with we're taking a turn on the road from this. We're not doing this. It was Obama that actually codified it and said, I'm decreeing that we do not follow torture. We repeal the memos that haven't been repealed already. And we're going back to being a law abiding country that recognizes due process and does not in any way support torture of individuals for purpose of interrogation or anything else. So that was not a long, slow slide. That was actually stopped and now started again. But again, the Obama administration decided that accountability would be more destructive than it would be constructive. That it might destroy agencies that we really relied upon for our national security, and that it was just better to turn the page and move forward. And I don't know if it would have made a difference in terms of being able to revive it, but I think it might have. And that's how I end the piece, basically. I think it could have, I think holding people accountable is a deterrent, to governments as well as to individuals. And so that's unfortunately where we are.
And I mean, just to clarify for people, holding them accountable, what would that have looked like? Are we talking about trials? Are we talking? I mean,
Yes.
do you have in mind?
Yeah, you did something that broke the law, and then they would say, "But the law was changed," and I would told I could do it, and then the government have to deal with, well, how was the law changed, and who is ultimately accountable? Is it people who followed orders, or is it people who created the system? And we, as a country, would have had to figure it out. And it's not about the punishment. It's about the recognition that what was done was wrong, and being able to say that and not be afraid to say it in a way that is powerful. And yes, that would have diminished some careers of people who are on the rise because of that, because of what they did to authorize torture or to implement torture. Uh, I'm a believer that that was a really important missed moment in terms of clarifying what is acceptable, what is possible, and what is impossible because it's unacceptable.
Let me take a break as we turn to our final questions. Thank you to all my subscribers who are tuning in and listening now or listening when I post this a little later. And thank you, paid subscribers, for supporting the long view and allowing these conversations to happen. And I hope some of you might consider becoming paid subscribers so I can keep doing this kind of work. Can you talk? I mean, we hear you are an expert in it, but many people don't have a sense of what we're actually talking about when we talk about torture. What kinds of acts do we know the U.S. has either been involved with or allowed for in other countries?
Okay, so you mean in today's context or in the
Yeah,
CIA black
in
sites context? In
today's
today's
context.
context. So the people that were taken to Sikot prison in El Salvador were, but to start, were unfed for the most part, kept in incredibly unsanitary conditions like toilets flooding the place, were kept in these positions for incredible amounts of time. I mean, you've seen the pictures with their heads on the floor between their knees, were in some cases beaten, were kept in this thing called the box, which was something that we take was one of the techniques used in the war on terror. Although in the New York war on terror, it was more akin to a coffin. Then I think these were actual just boxes that were not completely closed. Although I've gotten different descriptions, so I'd have to find out. Some of the worst things that we've seen in the war on terror, we have not seen now in terms of and another thing is being bombarded with noise so that you're unable to sleep, making sure that you're unable to sleep, which is eventually breaks down the human being, and what you can cope with and who you are. And it destroys your humanness and your psyche. Yes, we haven't heard about, waterboarding in this context. We haven't heard about shackling from the walls behind you. We haven't heard about all these techniques that I don't even want to say the names of, but that doesn't make it not torture. And I want to add something else to what's not torture. Not knowing what your rights are, not knowing whether you've been locked away forever, not knowing speaking the language where you are, et cetera, et cetera. These are all forms of abuse that have been able to just proceed. And it wasn't just in Sikot, it's also in Alligator Alcatraz in Florida. And so again, we're willing to bring this home as well. And the mistreatment of the intentional mistreatment of these individuals is who knows where this will go. And we haven't seen the legal authorizations for this. Really, we need to see if there were, what they said, how they said it, what did they rely on for that? Did they rely on memos that were taken away, or they're just not calling it torture? They're calling it just detention, and that's how it's done. Seacoast was known for being an abusive prison before we sent people there. I think it's the largest prison in the world, something like it has a capacity of 40,000 or something like that. And it, I mean, it's horrendous.
And to conclude, I mean, many people sometimes feel a little hopeless about these issues, and they almost accept this as American policy. What would be a few things, a couple concrete steps that might happen, obviously under different leadership at this point, either in Congress or the White House, to start to eradicate this as a part of American policy, this kind of torture? What would you be looking for?
I'll tell you what I would be looking for, not the use of executive orders to change it. It can't be norms, it can't be decrees. It absolutely has to be the law. And the fact that we aren't willing to get out there and actually, for example, the way the article starts is that the United States voted no against the Convention on Torture at the UN when it came up for, a vote. That's not okay. And I think we need to have a some strong legislation about just what the parameters are, and also some legislation about secrecy. I know that might not fit exactly into today because they like to broadcast what they're doing, but there is a level of secrecy in terms of where they're going, how they're going, when Americans find out about it that I think is very important to the conversation. So I think there are concrete things. One is just restoring the bans on reinterpreting the law secretly, but also restoring the bans on torture absolutely fundamentally. And in order to change that, it cannot be done in secret. It has to be done in the open. And if not, then there has to be a price to pay for it. And the problem is there is no price to pay for it right now. And that price might be anything from impeachment to defunding to whatever it is, to holding individuals accountable, or all of those.
Well, thank you again, Karen Greenberg, author of many things, but we're talking about Trump's war on women and return to the dark side, which appeared recently. Thanks so much for walking us through all of that, the history and the current policy.
Thank you, Julian.
Okay, talk again soon. Bye
Yep.
bye.